Welcome to the Social Millennial Podcast. It's been a while. So much has gone on personally and just in our world. This podcast won't be too long. I'm just coming back on here to just air out a few thoughts, report a little bit, maybe give some words of encouragement. Since we've been gone, COVID-19 has taken hold. We had such a rough time in quarantine. I had such a rough time in quarantine personally. I don't know about everyone else. I know everyone's trying to make the best of it, but it was tough. It was tough. So many people lost their jobs. So many people were forced out of their jobs to collect unemployment and so on, just to be able to survive. And a lot of people may not be getting their jobs back. A lot of industries were incredibly affected by COVID-19 and the quarantine orders and the various lockdowns. The world was affected by lockdowns, transportation bans, so on and so forth. In the news hasn't helped too much. It's just been a lot of bad, as news often is. There's been a lot of opportunistic journalism and a lot of gotchas and he said, she said, and look what this person said, and look what that person said, and just trying to hurt each other. And I'm all for making sure that the truth gets disseminated, making sure the truth is out there. But we need to love each other in this time of quarantine and sort of self-isolation. And as states at this point are opening up, gradually, even with the peril of a second wave of COVID-19. We need to just love each other. We need to understand that how much I care for my fellow man is going to affect my life and is going to affect my fellow man's life. And as each one reaches one, we can make this world greater. We can make this world something that it's never been. Going through this quarantine, the rich have been leveled down to the same as the poor. This COVID-19, hopefully for some, this quarantine has reminded some that we are all humans. We are all people. We all hunger. We all thirst. We all go through our ups and downs mentally and emotionally. We all just sometimes depend on things that we should not be depending on. And I hope that this time has reminded us of that. COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on our economy, and a lot of that has pressured these states to open up quick, or to try to just open up as fast as possible. People have jobs, people need to make money needs to flow, and things like that. So I get it, but a lot of people's safety are at risk, or is at risk. A lot of people's safety is at risk by opening up again. And hopefully, the human race will just ride out COVID-19. Hopefully we don't get a crazy massive surge and get into the tens of millions and 30s and 40s and 50s of millions of people. I'm optimistic, and I hope that that's the case. I pray that that's the case. I've personally had friends of mine who contracted COVID-19, who caught it, both young and elderly, my age and elderly. People who are very close to me, people who I care about a lot, had to go into intensive care. It was not a joke. By the grace of God, they came out of it. And then I know others whose family members caught it and passed away. So for all of those who've gone through it, for all of those who've lost because of COVID-19, my condolences. For something to just spring up and happen, and then 2-3 days later your loved one is gone. It's wild. It's a pain that I would not imagine, or that I could never imagine feeling. It's a pain that I don't know. Could just say, it's gonna get better. You'll get through it. It's hard. It's going to be difficult. Just looking to your left, looking to your right, and seeing that people aren't there. But you'll make it. They would want you to make it. They would want you to continue. Now more bad, I guess. More just sort of sad news about Mr. Floyd and his family. If you haven't heard in the news already, I mean, it's been everywhere. The video went viral. It's garnered national attention at the state and federal level. This is what's happening now, and has raised the question or brought into the forefront once again police brutality. I know I'm not really close or anything with the George Floyd family. I don't purport myself to be that kind of famous or anything, but just putting it out there in the universe. Condolences. They for their loss. Mr. Floyd was killed wrongfully. I know many will there is a contingency that would not call it murder. There is a contingency that of people in the United States that defend those police officers, and it's a free country. Everyone can have their understanding and their perspective and their opinion about what they saw and about what they see. I, for one, see it as murder, see it as wrongful killing. A lot of people, I've been seeing on social media a lot of people using it's so interesting, of a case study, to see a lot of people coming out and who are in defense of police officers, or who are a little bitter about the media and our culture, I guess, coming together at large to memorialize the wrongful death of this man. They're perturbed. They're bitter about it because of this man's criminal history, and that this man was purportedly, high on meth and so on. There were other chemicals in his body at the time of his death. And it's baffling to me why people would be that way, because it doesn't matter what I've done in the past. I don't deserve to die when I'm already apprehended for whatever wrongdoing, or maybe not even wrongdoing, I'm already apprehended. I'm in a state of defeat and not resisting. And you don't put me in a squad car. You leave me on the ground and continue to weigh down on me and on my neck until I'm done. I'm not moving anymore. It's horrendous that so many people in the United States, this whole contingency, would discount and minimize a man's humanity because of his criminal past. That somehow he should not be treated as a human being, as someone who is worth living, as someone who deserves due process because of his criminal history. It's telling. It's telling about where this culture has gone, where our culture, our American culture has gone, and how we really don't care as much as we want to say that we care about people. It's just saddening. I say it now and I'm thinking about it. I'm almost at a loss for words. 'Cause how I wouldn't want to see my brother die like that. I wouldn't want him to go through that. I wouldn't want my neighbor to go through that. It doesn't matter what they've done in the past. Give them due process. Let them go through the law. Let them do what has to be done for whatever the consequence is for what they've done. But they don't deserve that. They're humans. They're people. It's savagery, truly savagery. So my condolences to the Floyd family. Um, since then, protests have raged on and are still going on. I'm in NYC, and they are still going on. They're still happening in the 5 boroughs, as they should be. I do believe I am a firm believer in civil disobedience. I'm a firm believer in nonviolent protest. There's an interesting contingent as well within the people who are outraged about this, within those who are protesting, that believe that, or that seem to have begun to try to devalue the civil rights movement and the nonviolence movement of Martin Luther King Jr. in favor for the more violent, the more pressured Malcolm X movements. That's another thing that's telling in our community, in American culture at large, but then also in the Black community and people of color. I've never seen. I mean, maybe it's been around. Maybe I've missed it during other forms of or during other occurrences of police brutality that garnered national attention. But I'm seeing on social media and so on, a lot of individuals are saying, for what? Martin Luther King died and the civil rights movement happened and we're still in the same place. But we're not necessarily still in the same place. There's just more fronts to fight in. And it's so interesting. Even Martin Luther King knew before he died that the Civil Rights Act was only the beginning. That the end of Jim Crow was only the beginning. He was not naive enough to understand that just because we have a Civil Rights Act, that racial discrimination was going to be eradicated. And so many people, I mean, Christians, religious people, non-religious people of color are saying, will retort, when people talk about MLK and it's great that we're protesting and that these protests are peaceful, they will retort, but he was assassinated. It's like, we know. And since then, so many others have taken up the mantle of fighting fighting against racial discrimination, fighting against racism at the governmental level. So this is just things that I'm seeing in social media that are troubling regarding the direction of our American culture and the culture of the Black community in general, and people of color in general. This occurrence, this man's horrible and tragic death is shining a light on American culture, not just how there are many protections for delinquent police officers. Not just that it's shining a light on that, but it's also shining a light back to us who are outraged about it and what we do with that outrage, and how quick we are to want to strike down our enemy, and how quick a lot of us are to discredit those who died to get us to where we are regarding racial discrimination in this country. So many have died, and I'm trying not to cry, but I don't see where the humanity has gone in these individuals and these tangents of people and sections of people who would devalue the death of Martin Luther King because they're angry and want revenge against people who discriminate against other people. They want revenge against a few police officers. They want revenge maybe against white people. Maybe, and that tangent exists. The Black superiority tangent exists as well. And that pulling up the mantle of Malcolm X and wanting to hurt and destroy our oppressor by any means necessary, it makes sense in certain contexts. Don't get me wrong. In Haiti, those slaves rebelled against their slave masters, against the slave drivers, and retook their lives. It was a violent rebellion. There is context for those things, and I'm not, by saying what I'm saying, I'm not discrediting the merits of Malcolm X's ideology and Malcolm X's position. But I also understand that there's context to these things. That certain things work at certain points, other things work at other points. Certain things are justified at certain times, and other things aren't justified at certain times. And it's just that one would discredit, would minimalize, would invalidate the work of the civil rights movement in the 60s and the beginning 50s, the late 50s, is baffling to me, and is corrosive in my opinion, because this is a social millennial podcast. I am talking about my takes, my opinions here, how I see things. In my opinion, is corrosive to the black community and culture. Are there racists out there? Oh yes. Are there people who are racially discriminant, who believe their race to be superior? Oh yes. Are there people who treat others in kind and treat others as subordinate because they believe that their race is inferior? That's true. Facts. Are there people in government, judges, lawyers, top top government officials, Homeland Security, CIA? Are there people within all of those departments that are racist, that do feel, or that hold to the tenets of racial superiority? Yes, that is true. Do those people take advantage of the laws and the loopholes in this country to serve their own feelings and emotions regarding their superiority over other races that are inferior? Yes, very true. Will these people always exist? Will racial discrimination always exist? It may sound bleak, my opinion, but I believe it will always exist. I believe there are people who will always grow up in a certain environment. There are people whose brains will always be wired a certain way to side or group together with that tangent of people. Do I always believe or always understand that the laws of the land as a whole in America are racially biased, or somehow the written word of the law somehow racially discriminates? No. Are there laws that exist? There are very few that I believe are like that. And of that very few, it's really just because the wording is vague. It's not the way it used to be, where legally Africans in slave time were worth less than a human being, were worth less than a white man, a half, a third, a quarter. I do not believe that there are laws in this land that target in that way. Indirectly target, yes. Are purposefully worded vaguely so that it can be interpreted by a vast number of individuals who are meant to enforce the law in a vast number, in many different ways? Yes. So you have individuals, if we're talking about law enforcement, since this has brought this to the national spotlight, you can have one cop who believes himself to be racially superior, or who has been jaded long enough in his policing that he sees people of color as animals and subhuman, which happens, that he or she would invoke a certain law in a certain way in order to apprehend or just generally give trouble to what they might deem as savages or subpar humans, or animals. Yes, that exists. And then there is the police officer, whether white, black, red, yellow, Asian, Latino. There is the police officer who sees the spirit of that law and enforces that law, regardless of how vague the wording is, enforces that law properly and as impartially as he can. Both of these people exist. It's not that there are laws in this country that are specifically targeted. It's that there are people who wrote the laws that are racially discriminate and wrote them vaguely, made sure that the wording left that law's breadth far-reaching, or the possibility for it to be interpreted as far-reaching there. And so we get these statistics. So we get these contingencies of people who enforce our law, interpreting those laws and trying to create arrests, apprehensions, create trouble to fill up their quotas and to make sure that they make it in their respective departments. That exists. And I believe that that's what's happening. As these protests have continued, there has been violence. And let me say, if I haven't made it clear, I am not for, violence, especially against innocent people. If you're going to protest or you're going to go out there and be violent against something because you're upset at it, you go to the source of that thing, to your upsetment, and go try to fight that thing. We don't, in our daily lives, we don't sit down or if we were to get into a fight with somebody or someone strikes us, we don't turn around and then strike our neighbor who lives next to us because we're upset at this other person who struck us. No, we go to that person who came for us and come for them. That's how that would work, and that makes more sense to me. Though I'm not an advocate of violence. It seems like it seems like things are going on that are illogical. Now, it has also come to light, which was super interesting, that there seem to be this sort of insurgent contingent among peaceful protesters that are fomenting sort of the negative energy, that are helping it build, and that foments it into violence, that are triggering the violence. So, one person sees this other person who's completely covered from head to toe throw a brick or act aggressively toward the police and start beating on. And, there are people within the peaceful protesters that just decide to, throw down the sign and start fighting and start looting and start so on and so forth, because these other people are doing it and they're not getting arrested. So I can do it too. There are these insurgents there. It seems to be some planned, coordinated things going on. I don't know. I can't purport to know who's paying these people. I can't purport to know yet who's running these people. Some are saying it's Antifa acting as insurgents among the black community of protesters, fighting for certain kinds of anarchy and reflecting poorly on our community. And it's horrendous. A lot of this was going on. A lot of the burnings, a lot of the looting was triggered off of things like that. However, I am also a person that understands that because I believe in each one, reach one, we should all be responsible for what we are doing. And if I'm at a peaceful protest, which I have been at a few peaceful protests, if I see somebody now trying to strike the police at a peaceful protest, and I see somebody trying to loot and trying to break into something at a peaceful protest, I would make sure to distance myself from that, because I'm not for that. If all of us are there to picket peacefully, the few who are in the crowd who are trying to incite and foment violence, when they begin to do that, it's the crowd's responsibility, if they are committed to peace, to pull back the lines of the protest and allow those who are being violent to be singled out, because they are the ones violating the law. Because remember, most peaceful protests, aside from those that are, people just start taking to the streets in outrage, most peaceful protests are organized. Most protests are organized. It is a right that we have as Americans to protest. You get special permits and so on. So when you have people who are becoming or being violent, these sort of few actors among the crowd, it is the crowd's responsibility to be committed to peace and pull back and allow those violent people individuals to be exposed, so that the police or the law enforcement will not understand that the protest that's going on is not in violation of the permit that was applied for that protest. But we didn't really see that happening. We saw, individuals see other individuals fighting other people, and then we start fighting, and it just becomes a chain reaction. And I understand humans' reactions too on that end. You're upset. Your emotions are running high. But it's important. It's important. And I speak to Black community, all of America. It's important that we keep our heads. The community of color specifically, it's important that we don't give the people that we believe to be oppressing us the fuel to justify their oppression of us. Because that's those individuals who believe that they are superior to others and that their race is superior to others, they all they need is any little thing to justify why they believe what they believe, to justify their reality and their worldview. And to look at us as subhuman, to look at us as savage, to look at us as just those thugs on the corner, And so that outraged me. Thankfully, I have not been part of a protest that has gone violent, and I'm grateful for that. I've witnessed, but I've not been in the area. And we need to do better. We need to do better in making sure that our commitments are strong to what our purpose is when we protest, to what our goals are when we protest, to what we want to accomplish when we protest. And if it's violence, it's violence. I remember Rodney King, when those officers got acquitted, it was rioting. There was civil unrest. When it was caught on camera, all of them were implicated in literally just a gang beating of Mr. King. And so I understand the human emotion to rise up. I understand the context of the politically and just as a citizenry to rise up. I get it. But when we want change, when we want reform of police departments, when we want reform in training of the police, so that none of this happens again, so it doesn't keep happening. So the idea is that we don't want these kinds of people to be the ones who are in charge of protecting us, because they don't want to protect us. They're not there for that. They have their badges on and they're there to cause trouble. They're there to stroke their own egos. They're there to feed into their superiority. They're there to feel like they should enforce the superiority of their own race or their own kind or whoever they are. Now, I'm so glad upon recording this podcast, 50A got repealed in New York City. So, a lot of, officers' conduct reports can now be made available and are not protected, because it came out that the gentleman who put his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, he had trouble before. He had misconduct before. He'd gone through a lot of this stuff before, and they swept it under the rug. There were no psych evaluations. There was nothing. They just swept them under the rug. And we don't need that to happen. We don't. We need better oversight. We need less protections of the police in general, because if they're going to do their job and they're here to protect and serve the public, then the public should be able to scrutinize who is there to protect them, to serve and protect them. We don't need people with those types of superiority complex to serve and protect. And we don't need people who will allow that sort of system of no accountability and protection of the police to continue, because he had a bunch of other officers with him, and any one of them could have stopped him. Any one of them with a tap on the shoulder could have said, tap, 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 let's put him in the squad car as per protocol. Let's get him off the ground, put him in the squad car, drive him to where he needs to go to get booked. But they didn't do that. None of them did, which is why all of them are now on the chopping block. All of them are being charged, as well they should. And I don't believe it should be manslaughter for the others. I don't believe it should be aiding and abetting manslaughter and second degree murder. I believe this is murder in the first degree, intentional. I believe all of them should be held accountable for that first degree. All of them, not aiding and abetting, should be held accountable, because they all had a responsibility to keep that man alive so that he could be booked and so that he could stand in the court of law and have his day. That's what should have happened. That's the commitment to serve and to protect. Because sometimes serve and protect means protecting someone from themselves. We see somebody drunk, somebody running around. You don't expect police to kill that person because they're drunk. We don't. That's not what they're called to do. That's not what their protocol is. They're not judge, jury, and executioner. And this has happened so many times. Now, in the grand scheme of things, statistically, it hasn't happened, or the percentage of it happening is not gigantic. However, we do need to still strive to bring that percent as small as possible. And right now, there are protections that police officers enjoy that keeps that percentage where it's at. Because I know some will argue, oh, well, black cops, wrongfully killing black men, or just police officers white cops wrongfully killing black men is few and far between. And in the grand scheme of things in the United States, the percentage is very low. We want that percentage to not exist. And when it does exist, we need the cops involved to not be protected. We need them to stand in the court of law and have their day in the court of law for killing someone unwarranted. Because taking human life is something that should be treated as the most horrible. Human life needs to be treated as something that is valuable, whether the person is a criminal, whether they were committing a crime or not. And I think that speaks, that idea that it should be treated as something valuable in our society, and the other things that I'm seeing with individuals, people of color, discrediting or trying to minimize the work of the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King and so many others. It seems like it goes hand in hand. Earlier I said these people died so that we can have the Civil Rights Act, so that we can get to where we are now. It's not perfect, and it's never going to be perfect, because humans are evil. There will always be people who will think that their race is superior. Always. Always. It's like breathing air. It's like people lie. It's like people steal. It's like people cheat. It's always going to happen. What our responsibility is to make sure that people are held accountable, to make sure that people have their day in court, to make sure that the laws are written as impartially as they can be and as specifically as they can be, so that the vagary in wording cannot be misinterpreted and be used and co-opted. The spirit of the law could be co-opted for racial discrimination or racially discriminatory practices. We've gone through a lot as a country. We've gone through a lot. The military had been called in because of the violent protests. New York City where I'm at, BX, Social Millennial Podcast, gang, gang. They stopped the curfews, which is great. The military stepped in a few states. Didn't have to do it in New York, but stepped in a few places. It was very reminiscent. And I understand why so many people were up in arms about the military being called in, because I remember the Kent massacre. A mentor of mine reminded me of it. It's the sounds of New York in the background, people. I'm glad that things seem to be pulling back. The protests are continuing. The violence has lessened in the protests, so now our voices are being heard. Case in point in New York, here, where they repealed 50A, which is a huge step towards reforming the police department and police department practices. LA is moving to defund the police. I'll give my thoughts and opinions about that in a different podcast. I don't want to go too long or hold you guys too long, but I just want to encourage everybody. We're getting there. Violence is not the answer. We should not be becoming the people. We should not think that we have to become the people that we hate in order to get things done, because hate never breeds love. Violence rarely ever breeds peace, because even when someone steps in and does a more heinous act of violence to someone else and wins the day, that heinous act of violence reverberates in that other person's culture, in that other person's family. And that's how violence cannot breed peace. Because then the sons are raised to be ready to gain vengeance upon the father's oppressors and the father's killers, and the sons of sons and the sons of sons, and it continues like that. That's why. So wars may happen and we may come in, we won the day. But what happens 10 years, 15 years, 20 years later when the sons of the people that you killed are now back for more war? War and pain and hate does not breed peace and love. Martin Luther King knew this. He knew this and was willing to die for it. And he knew what he was getting into. He knew he had death threats before. He had attempts on his life throughout his career fighting for civil equality, racial equality. He almost died a few times. In our culture now of just wanting it now and the quick gratification, we need to understand that it takes time. It takes time, and it takes consistency, and it takes perseverance, and it takes persistence to change our systems. Now, I'll talk more about what I believe to be certain ideas that might help this situation, because I know often people criticize individuals who just sort of give critiques but don't give solutions to problems. I've got some ideas about how we can fix this police department issue and this policing issue. I'll save that for the next podcast. So make sure to pull up, make sure to pull up to the Social Millennial Podcast. Trying to stick to the old schedule. So we got Friday mornings. So hopefully same bat time, same bat channel. Social Millennial Podcast. If you want to send me any questions or any comments or any topics that you want me to talk about here on the Social Millennial Podcast, get the hot takes, get the cold takes, maybe a little bit of comedy, maybe a little bit of interesting happenstances, you can email at thesocialmillennialpod@gmail.com. You can, if you're listening to this on YouTube, feel free to leave a like. Feel free to subscribe, because Social Millennial Podcast is back. Feel free to leave a comment. Let me know how it is. If you like it, let me know. If you think it's trash and you hate it and you disagree with me, let me know. Man, this is a dialogue. This is a free country. I want to hear what people are thinking. I want to hear what other millennials, boomers, Zers, etc., Xers, pull up. I could take it. We got a thick skin over here at the Social Millennial Podcast. We're from New York, born and raised, gang. So we got it. I'm not going to snap at y'all for, letting me know that you disagree. That's just not how I roll. That's just not how it works. Believe me, I was raised hard knock in the streets, Hunts Point. You know what it is. West Fordham, East Fordham. You know what it is. Heights, you know what it is. East River, you know what it is. Fordham Road, you know what it is. So reach out because I'd love to sort of get a beat on the kind of things that y'all want me to talk about, that y'all want me to address. If y'all don't, I'll just be addressing the things that I feel like addressing 100% of the time. I want to maybe get you guys in on it. We haven't done a Patreon or anything yet. Maybe down the line we'll get there. But right now, enjoy it. Free Social Millennial Podcast. I'm not going to do recommendations today. This podcast was specifically reserved for what's going on, just sort of a catch up, just sort of a commentary on the things that have been happening. Condolences to the Floyd family. We just had the funeral, just had the memorial. Condolences to everybody who lost a loved one during this COVID-19 crisis. And we're going to see where this country goes and how our society evolves, through this tragedy. This police brutality tragedy and policing reform through the trials that are going to be ensuing to figure out whether we're gonna sentence these police officers, these poor excuses of police officers, and just what we've been going through with COVID-19. And yeah, I hope to see y'all soon. I hope to see everybody who's listening to come back and listen next week, because it's going to be wild. This is a shorter podcast. We're going to go in next week. All right. I know it was somber today. Words of encouragement. We're going to make it. We are America. America, we ain't no chumps. We ain't no punks. We going to make it through. Mi gente en Nueva York, we going to make it through. Gang, gang. Okay. All right. So, be blessed, y'all. And I'll see y'all next week. Peace.